It was the mid-1900s, and after losing the love of my life, I never imagined the turn my life would take. My husband's death was sudden and mysterious, leaving a void that I could never fill. I tried to uncover the truth behind his passing, but every path I pursued led to a dead end. Heartbroken and exhausted, I turned away every man who tried to win my heart, not wanting to endure that pain again. When my family began pressuring me to remarry, I knew I had to escape. I pleaded with the authorities for a transfer to a remote village, somewhere far from prying eyes and painful memories. My request was granted, and soon I found myself in a small, secluded village named Ravenswood. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, nestled deep within a forest of towering trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. The village was beautiful in its isolation, with houses scattered far apart and a heavy, quiet atmosphere that I grew to appreciate. They gave me a small hut near the edge of a lake, a serene spot where I could finally find some peace. The villagers were conservative, their lives rooted in tradition, but that suited me just fine. I was a religious woman, deeply knowledgeable, and I had come to teach the young girls of the village subjects like reading, writing, and arithmetic. On my first day, I met many of the village girls, but one in particular caught my attention, Nancy. She was strikingly beautiful with large, captivating eyes and a graceful way of moving that seemed out of place in such a humble village. Yet, there was something about her that I couldn't quite put my finger on, something that made me uneasy. As the days passed, I noticed that Nancy was becoming more and more radiant. Her cheeks glowed with a rosy hue, and her eyes sparkled as if she had been indulging in the finest of wines. But what struck me as odd was that her family was anything but wealthy. Her father was unemployed, and from what I heard, they struggled even to put food on the table. Once known as the most beautiful couple in town, Nancy's parents had somehow fallen into disfavor, their fortunes and appearances withering almost overnight. These details might have seemed insignificant to others, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every time our eyes met, a chill ran down my spine, and strange thoughts began to creep into my mind. Could it be that a man was providing for Nancy in exchange for something unspeakable? After all, she had no friends, and her family was isolated from the rest of the village. Their house, standing far from the others, was rumored to emit a strange smell, something like blood. The villagers kept their distance, and the family didn't seem to mind. The other girls in the village grew increasingly jealous of Nancy's beauty, and while everything appeared normal on the surface, I couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread that followed me wherever I went. One Sunday morning, before dawn, I decided to take a walk in the forest. I had been dreaming of my late husband recently, and the dreams were so vivid that I found it impossible to sleep. The cold, foggy weather seemed perfect for clearing my mind. But as I ventured deeper into the woods, I heard rustling in the bushes. My heart pounded as I froze, thinking it might be a wild animal. Hiding behind a large tree, I peeked out to see Nancy. She was running after two rabbits with a speed that no human could match. Before I could process what I was seeing, she caught them both and, without hesitation, slit their throats. Blood spilled onto the ground as she looked around, sensing she was being watched. Her eyes, once captivating, now glowed faintly red, and her expression was one of pure danger. My heart raced, but I forced myself to step out from behind the tree. "Nancy, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. She turned to me, her gaze piercing through the fog. "It's the only way to survive," she replied, her voice strangely calm. "There is no other way." I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of her words. "If you need help, you could have asked," I said, attempting to keep my voice steady. "Meet me this evening. I can help you." Nancy hesitated but then nodded slowly. That evening, she came to my hut and I offered her some money. At first, she refused, but eventually she accepted, a smile spreading across her face. For a moment, she seemed like any other girl, a normal, happy girl. But then she noticed a photograph of my late husband on the table, and something changed. A dark shadow seemed to flicker across her face, and she quickly grew quiet and distant. Her smile faded, replaced by a stern, unsettling expression. After that day, strange things began happening. A black cat started circling my hut, not just once but repeatedly, as if it was guarding or perhaps haunting me. The way it moved around the house sent chills down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a normal cat. At night, I was plagued by nightmares where the cat would eat my flesh, its cold eyes watching me with a hunger that I couldn't escape. And then there was Nancy. Every day when I went to the classroom, her smile, so wicked and knowing, made me more and more uneasy. It wasn't just my imagination. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I began to notice things, little things that added to my growing fear. Once I saw her staring at me from across the room, her eyes unblinking, her smile just a little too wide. Another time, she passed by my hut, and for a brief moment I swore I saw that same shadowy figure that had touched her face in the photograph. Something was happening to me, something beyond my understanding, and it all seemed to lead back to Nancy. The days passed quietly, but the sense of unease never left me. One afternoon, as I was walking through the village, I overheard two women talking in hushed voices. They didn't notice me as I paused near them, curious about what they were discussing. "Did you hear about Nancy's parents?" one woman asked, her voice low and secretive. "Yes, I've heard the stories," the other replied, glancing around nervously. "They say that Nancy's mother couldn't have children, and there was a terrible fight between her and Nancy's grandmother. The old woman wanted her son to throw his wife out because she couldn't bear him a child. She was furious that her son had married for love, especially since they were wealthy. She wanted him to marry someone rich, someone she approved of." The first woman nodded, her expression grim. After that fight, the couple disappeared for a while, and when they came back, Nancy's mother was pregnant, but she looked like a ghost. Her skin was pale, as if all the blood had been drained from her body. Her husband, on the other hand, was still as handsome as ever. But after Nancy was born, everything changed. The grandmother died mysteriously, and Nancy's father started looking just as pale and weak as his wife. They were only in their 20s, but they looked like they were 60. "And the money?" the second woman asked. "Gone," the first woman said, shaking her head. "It was all gone. They used to be the wealthiest family in town, but now they're poor and struggling. It's as if something cursed them." As I listened to their conversation, a chill ran down my spine. The story was disturbing enough, but what really caught my attention was how they described Nancy. Unlike her parents, who had withered away, Nancy was growing stronger and more beautiful with each passing day. Her health was extraordinary, and there was something unsettling about the way she carried herself. She never hesitated to glare at the other girls in class, especially the rich ones, and even the meanest girl in school never dared to bully her. I knew then that something unnatural was happening. I couldn't shake the feeling that Nancy was at the center of it all. Determined to find out more, I decided to visit her parents. I wanted to understand what was happening to them. But when I finally managed to meet them in secret, they told me nothing. Their eyes were hollow, their voices empty, and I left with more questions than answers. After that visit, the strange occurrences around me intensified. The black cat that had been circling my hut seemed to appear more often, always moving in slow, deliberate circles around my home, as if it was guarding something or someone. The nightmares grew worse too, with visions of the cat eating my flesh and watching me with cold, unblinking eyes. I couldn't understand why this was happening to me, and the fear began to take its toll on my mind. Still, nothing tangible had happened yet, and that gave me a small sense of relief. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. One night, as I lay in bed, thinking about my late husband, I drifted off to sleep without realizing it. The dream that followed was more vivid and horrifying than any before. I saw Nancy, her eyes glowing red, her lips twisted into a wicked smile. She was drinking blood from my husband's neck, her face inches from mine. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I woke up with a jolt, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked at the clock. 3 a.m. The room was freezing cold, but I was soaked with sweat. Tears filled my eyes as fear and loneliness overwhelmed me. I missed my husband so much that it hurt, but now I was more terrified than I had ever been in my life. As I sat there crying silently, I noticed something outside the bedroom window. A shadow. It wasn't large, but it was clearly human-shaped, and it was moving. The room was dark, but the bright moonlight outside allowed me to see the shadow clearly. It seemed to be trying to get inside, but each time it reached for the window, it quickly pulled back, as if it had touched something unbearably hot. I was frozen in place, my breath caught in my throat, watching the shadow as it struggled to enter. My heart was beating so fast that I thought it might burst, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. For what felt like an eternity, I sat there, waiting for something to happen. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow vanished, leaving me alone in the silent, dark room. I didn't sleep at all that night. When morning finally came, I was exhausted and terrified, but I knew I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I needed to talk to someone I could trust. I decided to go to the school and find someone reliable, someone who might help me make sense of what was happening. But even as I made that decision, a new fear crept into my mind. What if whatever was after me decided to harm those I turned to for help? The next morning, I was determined to find someone to talk to. The fear that had gripped me the night before hadn't lessened, but I knew I couldn't keep it inside any longer. As I walked through the village, my eyes scanning for a familiar face, something caught my attention near the lake. It was Nancy's mother, barely able to walk, her movements slow and labored. She looked injured. My heart skipped a beat as I rushed towards her, my mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. When I finally reached her, I was stunned by what I saw. Her neck was bitten, blood slowly seeping through her dress, and she looked like she could collapse at any moment. The dream I had last night flashed in my mind, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "Mrs. Harper, what happened to you?" I asked, my voice trembling as I grabbed her arm to steady her. The old woman, once so beautiful, tried to look away, her eyes filled with pain and fear. "Please, just let me go," she whispered, her voice weak and shaky. But I held onto her hand, my grip tightening. "No, I can't let you go like this. I know something's wrong. There's something strange about Nancy, isn't there?" At the mention of her daughter's name, Mrs. Harper began to cry, her tears flowing freely down her pale cheeks. "Nancy isn't our daughter," she sobbed, her voice filled with despair. "She isn't even human. She's going to kill us. She's going to kill us because she's found you. That's what she needs, your blood. You have to leave now, before it's too late." I felt the ground shift beneath me as her words sank in. The reality was too horrifying to grasp, too terrifying to believe. My mind spun as I tried to process what she was telling me. "You need to leave your house and go to the church," she urged, her voice growing more desperate. "It's the only place where you'll be safe." She didn't wait for my reply. She pulled away from me and stumbled off into the trees, her frail body disappearing into the fog. I stood there for a moment, paralyzed by fear, before I gathered myself and rushed towards the church. My heart pounded in my chest as I ran, the cold air biting at my skin. But when I reached the church, it was empty. There was no one there. Panic clawed at me as I left the church and ran towards the home of a family I knew well. They were good people, and I prayed they would take me in. When I arrived, I didn't tell them everything. I couldn't. I simply said I had been seeing strange things and that I couldn't stay alone any longer. They comforted me, offering me a warm bed and kind words. For the first time in what felt like ages, I managed to get some sleep. The nightmares didn't come that night, and when I awoke, my spirits were lifted, if only a little. But that fragile sense of peace was shattered by the news that came in the morning. Nancy's parents were dead. Both of them had died suddenly, and no one knew how. The entire village was in shock. When I reached the scene, I saw Nancy, her eyes red from crying, kneeling over their bodies. A foul smell of burnt meat lingered in the air, and the sight of their lifeless, charred bodies made my stomach turn. As I stood there, trying to make sense of what had happened, Nancy's eyes met mine. The look she gave me sent a chill down my spine, an expression of pure hunger and hatred. She walked towards me slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. When she reached me, she leaned in close, her voice a low, threatening whisper. They were not enough, but at least I could get some blood from their filthy bodies. You are the reason they died, and now you will satisfy my hunger.